Jean Grey has the Phoenix, but this ain't about them. This is about the time she lost her powers and then got them back. Miss Grey absorbed Psylocke's telepathy and lost her telekinesis, but not for long, she just got it back. And there wasn't an explanation, so Beast just made the connection that it must have been her secondary mutation, and he would know. Amanda gets into Beast's secondary mutation in part 1, go check it out if you haven't yet. Back to Jean. But what does the mutation that she gets mean for her and even other mutants? It potentially means she can restore her powers and come back from anything, and maybe even repower depowered X-Men. Of course, that's really up for debate, so let me know what you think down below. Cyberine, unfortunately, not a ship name for Cyclops and Wolverine, instead it's the name of the Wolverine version that killed Cyclops. Do I see an enemies to lovers plotline in the future? Wouldn't that be wild considering the whole Jean Grey thing? That is so not important. Anyway, so on Earth 517, that's the Marvel Contest of Champions Earth, Wolverine kills Cyclops. Hurting a friend to that extent is traumatic, and the psychological aftermath of it all caused Wolverine to experience a secondary mutation. This mutation allegedly was mimicking Cyclops' powers. So now we have a Wolverine with all his regular bells and whistles that also basically has laser eyes. New fear unlocked. Richard Gill of Earth 616 is better known as Wildside. He was a founding member of MLF, the Mutant Liberation Front. They are not good, guys. His original mutation was hallucinations. He did this likely through telepathy, and he was pretty good at it. Unfortunately for him, he was depowered after M-Day. But hey, he survived, and that counts for something. He did eventually get his special talent back through the Mother Vine thing, plus a couple bonuses that made him an even bigger problem than before. They made his powers the same, but better. Instead of just hallucinations in the head, they were also kind of physical. As long as Wildside is conscious to keep it running, you're basically in a fever dream that feels super real and you can feel pain in. But if you knock him out, you're good. Black King, not to be confused with Black Tom from part 1, Black King is a billionaire, genius, energy absorption secondary mutantist. He develops a secondary mutation. That's the point. Sebastian Shaw's original special skill is the energy absorption thing. He can use the absorbed kinetic energy to make himself stronger, faster, and just basically enhance himself. This makes him hard to beat. Many heroes are known for their ability to pack a punch, so what do when the better the punch you give, the better the enemy gets? Mental stuff! The secondary mutation comes when Sebastian underwent the Mother Vine enhancement process. The bonus he gets is that now he doesn't even need to get punched to absorb the kinetic energy. He can just absorb what's around him. Good for him, bad for everybody else. He also develops concussion blasts. The energy he absorbs can be like thrown at somebody. Wolverine's kiddo on Earth 1610 is taking after his dear old dad. James Jimmy Hudson Jr. has got the it factor, healing factor, and claws. First comes all that, and then comes the indestructible skeleton. His secondary mutation is that his skeleton gets coated in an organic metal. Wolverine famously has the Atom skeleton after going through a brutal, rough procedure, but his son, he just comes with it built in. It's what lets the kid have metal claws just like his dad. The metal trick can also make a pretty sturdy mouthguard. Unfortunately, Jimmy never knew his dad. Jimmy was adopted early in life, like newborn early, by Wolverine's friend James Hudson. But Jimmy did know the X-Men. Kitty Pryde was one of the first to meet him. She brought some of Wolverine's stuff and a hologram of Wolverine explaining to Jimmy that he was his son. She encouraged him to try out his mutations for the first time. Sabretooth doesn't just hate Wolverine, apparently. He hates the whole family tree because Sabretooth attacked little Jimmy too. Well, he was a teen at the time, so he wasn't that little. Some parents pass down family rings and some enemies for life. If you are trying to find Jimmy online, you might see the alias Poison attached to it. Well, one horrible day, the Poison Hive invaded Earth 1610. One invaded Jimmy. Long story short, most of the poisons end up eliminated, but lucky for Jimmy, not the one in him. That one dubs itself just Poison and walks the Earth in Jimmy's body. They are not on the same side at first, they are each fighting for control of the body, but eventually their physical form is threatened. They have to put aside their differences to survive and agree to work together to escape. Eventually they head off together to figure out how to co-inhabit one body, and all of this happened in the Ultimate Universe. Sharon Ginsburg is like the Elle Woods and Batwoman of the Marvel Universe. Let me explain. She is a mutant, but her civilian job is being a lawyer. Lawyer by day, bat-winged mutant by night. Or whenever she she needs her wings. She is made for flying, her bones are lighter, and she is smaller than the average person. Her wings are massive, like at least a 15-foot wingspan, but because this is Marvel and everything is possible, she can easily hide the wings. The wings are her whole identity in terms of mutanthood, so losing those wings, that's a lot of trauma and pain, and apparently the exact right amount to trigger a secondary mutation. Her secondary mutation brings in even more bad qualities. When her wings were roughly removed, she fell unconscious. Eventually waking up, she realized they were gone. She was so upset and angry, she manifested bat claws, and she went insane. She was captured in X-Statix 11, and we haven't seen her since. I hope she's doing well. Thanks to a secondary mutation, Havok can wreak havoc forever. But first, Alex Summers' talents include energy absorption, even from something like a star. Because of that bit with the star, he is definitely immune to extreme heat and radiation too. He shoots plasma blasts, usually from his arms. They can be used as a weapon or to even help him fly. So that's pretty much everything he had going on before the secondary mutation. His secondary mutation appeared in the Mutant X storyline. Alternate reality versions of Alex Summers got yanked together by a cosmic force, and we don't really learn that anything serious mutation-wise has happened until Alex passes away, then doesn't. He wakes up in a different timeline in a different version of himself. Now, he has the ability to shift his consciousness from one version of himself to the next. Can he die? Maybe. Being a host for the nexus of all realities is what caused this. You've heard of Mother Earth. Get ready for Nature Girl. She does go by a few names, and I was not prepared for one of them. Her civilian name is Lin Lee, but her other mutant name is Armageddon Girl. That's a 180 from Nature Girl. It is fitting though, because she did do a 180. She started out as a hero. She attended the School for Gifted Youngsters, named the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning at the time. It had been established that she could control or influence nature and animals. Make birds carry her, plants fight for her, that kind of stuff. She goes off the rails and joins the bad guys. Bad for everyone else, but good for her because she discovers her secondary mutation. She not only has a connection to all things in nature and can influence them, she can draw power from them to make herself more powerful. The power she is drawing though is basically the thing's life force, so she usually ends up killing whatever it is that she's drawing from. Right around one of the last times we saw her in the X-Men Unlimited Infinity comic is when she started going by the name Armageddon Girl. Pietro and Wanda are probably the most, maybe, famous mutants, it's a whole thing with them, of the Marvel Universe, but there's another set of definitely mutant power twins that deserve some attention too. Northstar and Aurora. They are a beacon of light, literally. When they were babies, they were separated after a car crash killed their parents. While separated, they both learned of their mutant abilities on their own throughout their teenage years. Both twins are very fast. Northstar used this to become an Olympic champion. They can both fly, but their big trick only appears when they are together, so sweet. When they physically touch, they can generate a powerful, bright light. It can blind or simply just distract enemies. The secondary mutation manifests after a series of experiments requested by Aurora so that the twins can do the whole light thing without touching. It works, and now they both have a semi-new talent. Angelic X-Men Warren Worthington III was just a guy until he got his wings. Then he was a mutant with the ability to shockingly fly. The wings have other uses too, they are really strong, so he can use them to fight. Angel, unfortunately, got mixed up with Apocalypse, and Apocalypse planted a death seed in Warren. Warren becomes Archangel on his way to being the next Apocalypse, which is a very bad thing. He doesn't get there though, good news. What he does get is healing blood. Kind of. Warren himself gets an accelerated healing factor, but if you were to get a blood transfusion from him, that blood is supercharged with the healing powers. We see this happen in Uncanny X-Men 420. I'll take a wild guess and say that he's got the universal blood type. He also got blue skin. He used to be just a guy. Look at him now.
The Blob, or Frederick Dukes, is one of those characters. Now, I really didn't give the Blob enough credit when I was growing up, and he can actually do some pretty cool things, and some things that didn't even occur to me. His actual main mutant ability, for example, is that he can essentially become immovable by creating a monodirectional increase of gravity beneath him that extends about 5 feet in radius from his center of balance. But what's even cooler is that, with some training, Blob was able to manipulate his gravitational aura outwards in order to trigger a localized implosion. Also, the Blob is incredibly durable. The fat on the Blob is able to absorb the impact of rifle bullets, cannonballs, bazookas, and even torpedoes. He has been able to survive being hit by a meteorite that was 50 feet in diameter moving at terminal velocity, but that's not all. Blob is also able to manipulate his body, basically shapeshifting to a degree. After undergoing the Mother Vine enhancement process, Blob developed a secondary mutation, liquid form. Now, not actually, but his secondary mutation allowed him to stretch his body to a great extent, and the problem is the mutation was hard to control, so when he first ever manifested it, he stretched himself too far and basically turned into a puddle. Next up is Gambit, and Gambit has the really cool mutant ability of molecular acceleration, allowing him to convert the potential energy of a non-living object through touch and kinetically excite the molecules to the point that they explode. Usually when a mutant has an ability that manipulates molecules, they have a pretty vast array of powers, but for Gambit, he mainly just uses his abilities as attacks, charging up his signature playing cards and bow staff and other objects like that. We have seen him reach the full potential of his power, only this was an alternate reality version of the guy. He could manipulate kinetic energy down to a molecular level, which basically made him a god. But as you may have guessed, Gambit has a second mutation. After a traumatic event left him blind, a secondary mutation kicked in that allowed Gambit to be clairvoyant. Gambit's ability did not give him the power to consciously look into the future. Instead, his secondary mutation acted like a warning system, kinda like the spider sense. He could sense danger and react to it. Now, fortunately for him, Gambit got his sight back not long after losing it, meaning he stopped needing to rely on this secondary mutation, but he does still totally have it. Daken, or as he's going by now, Akihiro, possesses a lot of the same abilities as his father Wolverine. He has a crazy healing factor, superhuman senses, and of course, bone claws. But what some people may not be aware of is the one mutation he possesses that neither his father nor his sister / clone possesses. That power would be pheromone control. Daken has empathic pherokinetic abilities that allow him to use his pheromones to manipulate the emotional state and sensory perception of others. He has used this ability to instill intense fear, happiness, depression, fascination, and a false sense of security in others. The false sense of security one is probably the most interesting, as it's allowed him to sneak up on others without them even worrying that he could be there. He also has used this ability to alter others' depth perception and vision, making them fight sluggishly. He can also control his own pheromones to make him basically untrackable, even to someone like Wolverine. There are limits to Daken's pherokinesis, but it's such a cool ability. If you have seen the movie Logan, then you'll recognize Caliban as the blind, seemingly albino mutant who hangs out with Logan and Professor X. In that movie, he displays Caliban's main ability, which is being able to detect mutants' X genes, usually within a 25-mile radius. Although, it's worth noting he has been able to detect particularly powerful mutants from further away before. But what I want to talk about is Caliban's other power that most people don't know. This is called his flight or fight response. Whenever Caliban feels stressed, he manifests two extra powers: super strength that can overpower Spider-Woman and fear absorption. This second power allowed Caliban to absorb the psionic energy created in the fear from others and amplify it back into his environment, doing things like very quickly turning those nearby into a fear-induced panicked mob. This ability was boosted up by Apocalypse twice when Caliban served him as both death and pestilence. The mutant Toad has been a member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and by extension a part of the mutant community for a hot minute, but in my opinion, Mortimer Toynbee hasn't really been utilized as much as he should be given his massive list of abilities. Toad has a degree of superhuman strength, specifically in his back and legs, which allows the little weirdo to jump around 25 to 37 feet, and he'll kick you so hard that you are never getting back up again. He's got flexible bone structure, superhuman stamina, durability, reflexes, and agility. Toad, like a lot of super beings, has a regenerative healing factor, but unlike a lot of mutants, he has UV vision, a super strong 30-foot prehensile tongue, acidic saliva, sticky paralytic resin out of his pores, and pheromone secretion. I can understand why he isn't exactly at the top of the mutant landscape, partially because he's kind of really gross and just overall unpleasant, but he does have a hell of a lot of abilities to offer. The X-Force member known as Shatterstar, a lot like Toad, just has a huge list of abilities that just keeps getting added to. Gavidra 7 learned the arts of battle as a warrior in arenas on Mojo World, where he developed both a sense of honor and incredible fighting skill, but those aren't his abilities. He possesses a large superhero starter pack: superhuman strength, speed, agility, stamina, durability, senses, reflexes, agility, dexterity, coordination, balance, plus a regenerative healing factor and even enhanced learning ability. Now curiously, he actually has hollow bones as well, which makes him lighter than you would think, but also further boosts up his natural physical skills. Now the cool part of Shatterstar are his Mojoverse swords, which he can use with his mutant ability to channel powerful vibratory shockwaves, which can be absolutely devastating but also drains him of energy. But also, after his Mojo time, he can now create X-shaped portals that have to be linked to another person who acts as an anchor for said portals, if that makes any sense. These also drain him, and he has a cooldown of about 4 days before he can do it again, because this powerhouse needs some kind of balancing of some sort. Next up is Sage. Sage is basically a super genius, with a brain more powerful than any computer in the world, granting her perfect memory and rapid analytical abilities. She can come up with the perfect plan in an instant, learn just about any skill without having to practice, remember everything she's ever experienced, perform multiple tasks at once by allocating a partition of her brain to each task, and, thanks to training with Professor X, she can engage in telepathy. Her telepathic abilities allow her to detect minds and read them, project thoughts, astral projection, cast realistic mental illusions, and she even has a kind of psionic defense unique to her called her firewall. But it doesn't even stop there, as Sage even has some biokinetic abilities as well, including reading another mutant or person's genetic code and DNA, being able to literally see who someone's related to, jump-starting latent or enhancing current mutant abilities, and she has complete control over her physical body, being able to expel nanobots from her body by controlling her immune system, almost like highly advanced antivirus. She needs more time in the spotlight, that's all I'm saying. Next up is Wolfsbane. Rain Sinclair has the mutant ability that I kinda wish I had when I was a wee little lad. She can turn herself into a wolf at will, and can even go into a transitional form that is basically as close to a werewolf without being a werewolf as you can get. In fact, she is basically a werewolf, but with none of the drawbacks of being that kind of monster. She retains all her faculties minus not being able to talk and just being a little tiny bit feral, and is not forced to change only at nighttime. Rain grows much larger than her human form when she changes, and gains access to some enhanced strength, a healing factor, and enhanced vision, which coupled with the body of a wolf grants her enhanced speed and reflexes as well. But then she got a secondary mutation, and it's a weird one. After becoming an agent of Mutation in X-Men Blue number 9, she gained the ability to somehow transform into a pack of 5 wolves, and on top of that, her general wolfy-like characteristics, like claws and teeth and all that jazz, also became stronger and sharper on top of that. Paige Guthrie is part of a family that has a lineage of mutant abilities. Sam Guthrie, Cannonball, Joshua Guthrie, Icarus, Melody Guthrie, Arrow, and Jebediah Guthrie are all part of her family. Paige's power is a wee bit unorthodox though. She has the ability to shed her skin, and by concentrating on specific chemical or elemental formulas, she can cause the layer of skin underneath to be a different element or shape or state. With that power, she's been able to have skin made of metal, diamond, granite, wood, rubber, glass, and one time she even managed to basically turn into a lizard, which should be a secondary ability all by its own. Husk has always had troubles with her powers, such as not being able to morph multiple times without intense pain. However, in Generation X, it got a little bit worse when Paige started suffering from dramatic mood swings and patchwork morphs. It was then revealed later that her secondary mutation also causes her to change personalities every time she morphs, and that can cause her to act out or even black out. And last but not least, as the daughter of Magneto, Polaris actually has pretty much exactly the same abilities as him. She can control and manipulate magnetic fields, allowing her to create force fields, fly on the Earth's magnetic field, emit magnetic concussive pulses that can overload and short-circuit electrical systems, and so much more. But there was a very short period of time where she gained a power we have never seen from her father. When the villainess Zaladane stripped Lorna of her powers, leaving her completely vulnerable, the jolt of losing said powers forced Polaris' latent secondary mutation to evolve. Polaris was now able to absorb negative emotional energy to transform into a virtual powerhouse. She grew in height and gained super strength, durability, and invulnerability. Basically, Polaris can Hulk out. Now, after regaining her magnetic powers, Lorna lost her Hulk-like abilities, but it is still technically something that she could do until the Scarlet Witch caused M-Day, which got rid of the ability altogether.
For this point, we're talking about Elixir's physical mutation, the golden hue of his skin. This change occurred shortly after his first appearance. Only a few issues later, he actually uses his powers to heal himself and his skin changes to a golden color. So it seems to make sense that I wouldn't know this was even a secondary mutation, since most of his appearances have been with this look. Joshua Foley, aka Elixir's skin, also changes color when he uses his powers to harm others, changing from a golden hue to a deep metallic black color. The changing of his skin is not something that Elixir also seems to be able to control, but instead is a mutation that is closely tied to his primary healing and death touch abilities. If your skin changed color anytime you did anything, what would you definitely want it to be or not want it to be? While many heroes have secondary mutations, let's not forget that this whole idea in terms of when it was classified started with Emma Frost, who herself was once a famous villain. Likewise, there have been other villains who have also gained a secondary mutation, but who simply aren't as well known. Enter Black Tom Cassidy, a classic mutant villain, and if you aren't familiar with him, you should be. He's pretty cool. His secondary mutation has changed somewhat throughout his history. It's been described as giving him the upgraded ability to channel his bioblast through his fists, as opposed to needing wood to channel said blast, which is what he originally had, giving him his own plant form, and giving him the power to manipulate plants and wood around him. Like many others on our list, Black Tom actually got this sort of secondary mutation from being mortally wounded, but yeah, it's changed a lot throughout the years in terms of exactly how it works or what it does. It feels weird to include Beast also on this list, but when I think about most people I know who love the X-Men, they usually always think of Beast as being default blue. Now this is because most of the people I know grew up with the 90s or early 2000s Beast after he'd undergone his secondary mutation. Many fans out there still don't know that Beast's original power set was just that he was like super dexterous. He just looked like a guy. He had big feet, big hands, and he swung around a lot. Initially, Beast looked like this guy, but after being exposed to a serum he created, which isolates and boosts the X gene in mutants, he became permanently mutated again, gaining the secondary mutation of the blue fur. In fact, I think Beast may be the first mutant in comics to have developed a secondary mutation, before we even had a terminology for it at that time. He mutated. He's all covered in blue fur, which initially was actually like a gray fur, but that's a whole other story. That has to do with comics coloring and miscommunications and just how blues and blacks got often mixed up by people. With this next one, we're not talking about that time that Kitty Pryde was turned into a cat person in Wundagore, although that was a thing that happened. It was something though that she was given as opposed to an evolution of her mutant-based abilities, and it was temporary. With Kitty, or Kate, it's interesting as there are a few different instances where I feel one could argue that she manifested some kind of secondary mutation, or more specifically evolution of her powers. But this has also, I don't believe, ever fully been confirmed in the comics. Let me know if I missed something and if there is a page where someone says, this is a secondary mutation. I'd like to focus on the heightening of her powers over the years, which I believe is the version of a secondary mutation, as I understand what secondary mutations are, which can either be a significant power boost or it can be something additional. Some people, however, see secondary mutations as just something new and concrete added to a mutant's power set, like Emma Frost's diamond form, which exists separate from her telepathy, but it doesn't need to be that. And in fact, I think a major power boost does count, hence why I'm counting it. and if you don't agree, we can debate about it in the comments. Like when Kitty stopped needing to hold her breath while intangible, or when she was merged with the Black Vortex, becoming all-powerful, but then after giving up the Black Vortex's power, discovered that she had unlocked a new level of power through that, so after using it, it was kind of like an additional mutation. As I said, there are actually multiple moments for Kitty when I feel like this has happened, but those are the main ones that come to my mind. Speaking of folks who have seen major power boosts throughout the years, enter Bobby Drake, aka Iceman. Iceman has had a few different moments like Kitty Pryde where I would say his powers have evolved, and which could be considered a secondary mutation as he severely leveled up. When he learned he could manipulate his body into more than just ice or snow and learned to use his water form. When he learned he could just become straight up ice. That was a whole thing, because before he was, I believe, covered in it. When he healed back up after having his ice form shattered. And when he learned he could make ice clones. Honestly, Bobby's just had a lot of moments because he's super OP. Sync developed a pretty powerful secondary mutation after he returned from the dead during the Krakoan era, so this is a recent one, so you might not know if you're not following with modern comics, or maybe you are and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the one I do know. His secondary mutation is more suspected, I would say, than confirmed. Well, we know he has this ability now, but we don't necessarily know if it is a secondary mutation or not. The ability in question is that he can now remain synced with other mutants even without being near them. I believe the idea is if he's synced with you once, he can kind of sync with you whenever, but of course there are some limits to this and we're still kind of figuring out how that works. I don't think that sync using those powers if you're not near him would be as powerful. However, this mutation also takes a toll on his body and it seems to age him faster every time he uses it. In addition to this, he can also sync with superpowered non-mutants as well, which is huge. As I said, the full extent of his newfound abilities has not been explored, and I don't know if everyone would consider them to be a secondary mutation, as they're still tied to the same power set, but I personally do. I believe secondary mutations can also manifest in a boost to a predetermined power set, and I think this should count. To me, it's a secondary mutation, so there you go. Take it or leave it. Cypher is another hero who went from being kinda lame to kind of insanely powerful thanks to his own secondary mutation. Honestly, I've become a pretty big Doug fan in recent years, now that I better understand just how powerful his power set can be. I think my love of Doug comes from me also realizing just as a person how important communication is in my everyday life, and how much I value being around other people who can communicate well, and also value my ability to communicate with them. When we can't understand each other, it actually creates big problems in our lives, and that's what I appreciate about Doug and his power set. His ability to communicate and through that resolve so many issues without even needing to come to blows. In terms of his mutation, we saw him go from a character who could just understand all languages and communicate with people in that way, to someone who really understood the various minute types of languages around us that often go unnoticed, and thereby become a master of those types of languages as well. Things like technology, and even at one point physically fighting, which is a sort of physical communication or language and dance. This shift in his abilities happened after Doug died and was resurrected, and it honestly puts him on a whole other level, and really he's pretty powerful. I know sometimes we say, oh, communicating, is that powerful? Actually it is. I always forget about Kid Omega's secondary mutation because it just very rarely comes up in the comics anymore. Probably because Quentin Quire no longer finds it interesting, at least that's the canon reason that we were given for this. Though I personally think it sounds super interesting, and I am surprised that he is bored of it. However, this is Quentin, so maybe I shouldn't be so surprised. He is often unimpressed by some of the coolest stuff, or at least he presents himself this way often. Kid Omega's secondary mutation here is a non-corporeal form, which when accessed also speeds up his consciousness and allows him as a telepath to reach out and connect with all sentient beings. He can think at the speed of light while in this form, but then again, even when Quire isn't in it, he is known for being one of the fastest thinkers and one of the smartest psionics on the planet. Maybe that's why he was like, it's alright. I become like whatever, I don't have a physical form, but like, I'm pretty cool even when I have a physical form. Said to be the daughter of Unis the Untouchable, one of the earliest X-Men villains, Carmella's mutant power set is similar to her father's. However, at one point her powers evolved evolved even beyond her own control. This seems to be a result of being exposed to Mother Vine, which triggered a secondary mutation in her. This mutation would cause her energy field to overcharge the more she used it, making it more devastating in terms of the damage it did to the people and technology around her. And if you aren't familiar with Unis the Untouchable, his main thing was that you couldn't touch him because he had a field around him that made it impossible to touch him. But this is also a field that blasts out in Carmella's case as well. What was worse, she had no control really over the power of her energy field, and she also suffered as a result thanks to overcharge resulting in a backlash. So when it happened, she would also be in pain as well. So she'd be causing pain to others and then also be like, ow. I mean, I know she's like a villain normally, but still, sucks, you know? That would suck, whether you're a villain or not. Something about people being in near-death experiences that seemingly allows them to evolve out of survival. Mask is another one of those mutants, and Mask was inherently more of a villain in the comics, and also a Morlock. However, being a Morlock wasn't what made him evil, because Morlocks are not inherently evil. What made him evil was his outlook on life. His mutant powers allowed him to alter the appearance of others, basically turning him into one of the world's most powerful plastic surgeons. But at the same time, Mask was considered himself to be hideous, hence why he hid in the underground tunnels of New York with the Morlocks and usually led them. And his powers did not work on his own physical appearance. That is, until he was killed by Shatterstar. To survive, he had to move his organs around, and this actually unlocked the power within him to manipulate his own appearance. For a while, he actually used his powers to appear as Marilyn Monroe, no I'm not kidding, while leading the Morlocks. Although now Mask has seemingly gotten over his obsession with beauty and chooses to mostly appear just as he is. A friendly reminder to love yourself, friends. Take a page out of Mask's book. Actually, at least I think that's what happened to him. I don't know. I haven't read every single Mask issue, so. But if there isn't a Mask issue where he realizes, you know what, maybe I should love myself as I am, there should be one. And if there isn't, Marvel, if you need someone to write it, I'll write it for you.